Hi there, this is Tony from pianotone.ca, and this is my review on the Roland FP-30X Digital Piano. I actually owned the prior version, the FP-30, for a few months back in 2020 before I traded it in on a Yamaha P125. There were some things I really liked about the FP-30, and there were some things I really didn't like, as well as some kind of important features that were just missing. A lot of those negatives actually got addressed with the FP-30X, but some of them didn't. And my local store has started allowing rentals with their FP-30Xs, so I thought it was time to actually check out the new version for myself. So let's check out the review. Okay, so I wanted to talk about the user interface first, because the user interface on the FP-30, or lack thereof, was my single biggest negative about the FP-30. And unfortunately, Roland didn't make any improvements to the user interface, so this is still a big issue with me. But to be totally honest, it might not be an issue at all for you. When I originally bought my FP-30 and reviewed it, I was still pretty new to the piano market, and I didn't get too negative about the user interface. But after buying, selling, renting, and reviewing keyboards and pianos for the last couple of years, I found that I've got less and less tolerance for keyboards that make you look up function key combinations in a manual to configure settings, especially if you have to do that for common settings like layering, voices, or splitting the piano. And when you have to use key combinations just to select voices, I'm definitely not a fan, especially on a piano like this that has more than just a handful of voices. So you select voices on the FP-30X using these category buttons. There's 3 categories: piano, electric piano, and other. And then you look up in the manual on this chart to see what piano key you need to press to get the voice that you want. So for example, if I want a ragtime piano, I hold down piano, and then I press the F1 key. And then once I've done that, the only visual indication I have that as far as what I chose and what my current voice is that one of these buttons is lit up, so I know that my current voice is one of the 12 options that's within the piano category. So I don't really have the ability to look at the piano and know what voice I have selected. Now, to layer 2 voices, you can press 2 of the 3 categories at once, and the most recently selected individual voice in each category is going to be layered together. So the default for this is piano and strings. So for example, because I've already changed the piano category to be ragtime, if I go piano and other, you can see those are both lit up, so I do get a visual indication that I'm layered. So I've got the ragtime piano with strings now. But what if I want something different? You're going to have to look up the key combinations for each voice in the manual and select them individually, then press the 2 category buttons together. For example, if I wanted to layer a soft pad with my ragtime piano instead of strings, then after having selected the ragtime piano, which I've done, I'm going to have to figure out what key is the soft pad, and it's A#1, so I hold down other, and I hit A#1. Now I've got my pad, and now when I press piano and other together, I'll have ragtime piano over the pad. So from this, you've probably already noticed that using the piano, there's no way to layer 2 voices from the same category. And once you're set up, while you can tell that you're layered because you see the 2 categories lit up, again, you've got no idea what voice from each category you've got selected. And for splitting, it's the same basic process. If I get out of here and I press split, then it's going to give me a default voice of an acoustic bass. It's actually a nice sounding acoustic bass in the left hand, and then whatever my most recently selected voice was in whatever other category I happen to have selected. So it's going to be the ragtime piano. Now, if I wanted to have a different voice in my left hand, for example, let's say I wanted to have the bass and cymbal, then I would hold down split, and I'd have to look up this key again in the manual. Hold down split, hold down other, and then press G#2, which is this one. And now I have that with my ragtime piano. Now, as I mentioned, the really big side issue with this is that there's no way that you can just look at the piano and have any idea what it is that you've got selected. In comparison with my Yamaha P125, I can quickly and easily make voice selections, turn on splits or layers, and see what my current choices are just with a glance. Now, another issue with this user interface that I'm really not a fan of is these volume up and down buttons. These are just kind of clunky to use, especially for trying to make fine adjustments for your volume in comparison to a volume knob or a slider. And given that there are only 5 lit volume indicators, you actually have no idea looking at the display what your actual volume is. There's actually 100 volume increments on the FP-30X. So these are basically going up in 20s. So if I'm here, like right now, for example, you can see I've hit that button a few times, and as far as the indicators go, my volume's the same, but I'm actually turning it down. So it's until it goes down to 60, which it just did, then now I know I'm at 60. Now, while setting up voices can be pretty time-consuming with key combinations, there are thankfully a number of labeled keys. There's key labels above a bunch of the keys on the piano. These don't help you select voices, but they help you with some of the settings on the piano, which is a welcome addition. There's labeled keys for setting the input volume up and down to control the input volume of the Bluetooth or USB audio in, for setting the metronome tempo, for transposing up or down, turning twin piano on or off, which is where the teacher mode that splits the piano into 2 identical octaves, and for adjusting the level of ambience, which is reverb, or brilliance, which is chorus. Those are nice to have. For choosing the touch sensitivity level, for tuning the piano up or down if you need to fine-tune to an acoustic instrument, for controlling the playback of songs on your flash drive, and for setting your speaker EQ choices. So because I have no interest in learning a bunch of key combinations for this review, I will be using the Roland Piano app on my iPad to select voices and make other setting changes as I go. This app has replaced the Piano Everyday app, which was the original app released for the FP-30X. The FP-30 used an app called Piano Partner 2, which was an okay app. When I am using the app during my review, I'll try to include a screen capture so that you can get at least an idea of how that app functions. So in trying not to be overcritical of the user interface, if you're just using the piano at home for fun, then I guess having to look up key combinations really isn't the end of the world, in all fairness. When I had my FP-30, it didn't really bother me too much, so maybe I'm making too big of a deal about this. But if you have any intention of using the FP-30X to busk or gig or perform with, in my opinion, unless you're just turning it on and only using 1 or 2 sounds, this user interface is not going to cut it for performing live. You will definitely need to rely on the app, but depending where you're performing, the app may actually not even work, so you'll be forced to memorize key combinations anyways. More on that a bit later in the review when I go over the app. Key action. Okay, so one of the highlights of the FP-30X, without a doubt, is the PHA-4 key action. This is the same action as on the FP-30. It's a triple sensor action with escapement. There is a matte faux ivory finish on the keys, and there are 5 levels of touch sensitivity plus fixed. This is the same action you'll find in the less expensive FP-10 as well as the more expensive FP-60X, and it's one of the only triple sensor actions in this price range. So if you're accustomed to playing acoustic pianos, then this action is likely going to feel more realistic than a dual sensor action like Yamaha's GHS action or Casio's smart scaled hammer action. That being said, though, action is a very personal thing. Some people prefer lighter actions, some people prefer heavier actions. Neither one is right or wrong, it just comes down to personal preference. While I do like quite a few things about the Roland's PHA-4 action, my personal preference is actually Yamaha's GHS action. I just enjoy playing on it more. I find the Roland action to be heavier on the way down than Yamaha's GHS, but I also find that keys seem to take a bit longer to return back up than the Yamaha does. So if I'm playing something like slow blues, then it's fine. But if I try to play, faster's 50s rock, I find the combination of the keys being a bit heavier and taking a bit longer to return back up makes it a bit more challenging and actually kind of tiring to play. Because I'm used to a lighter action, I'm using a touch sensitivity setting that is 1 lighter than the default of medium. This does help me hit my desired level of dynamic control, but it doesn't change the actual weight of the keys. But all that being said, I also very rarely play on acoustic piano, so to me, having an action that mimics an acoustic piano as close as possible doesn't really matter. As far as whether you'll like an action or not, the only way to really know is to go into a store and try out a bunch of different actions on different pianos and test them out for yourself. Voices. Okay, so the voice selection on the FP30X is pretty similar to the FP30, but there's a few added tones as well. It has 56 tones as opposed to 35. While both the FP30 and FP30X both use Roland's supernatural sound modeling, the FP30X is equipped with an updated sound chip that doubles the polyphony from 128 to 256. And this indicates more than just you've got more polyphony. It also indicates that this chip has more powerful processing available to enhance the sounds. And after testing the FP30X out, it's pretty clear that Roland has done exactly that. It's hard to put into words, and granted, a lot of this is from memory and from watching my old videos on the FP30, but it just seems that in general, most of the voices, but in particular the piano and electric piano voices, have noticeably more resonance, warmth, nuance, and detail than on the FP30. Now, I should also mention that when you're connected to Roland's piano app, that you also have access to a bank of 127 MIDI sounds. These are not as advanced as the onboard sounds, but I will demo one piano from that area just so you can compare it to the far superior supernatural piano sound. But enough talking. Here's a demo of some of the main sounds on the FP30X. I'll include some split and layer demos as well, including modifying relative volumes and shifting layer octaves. And as I mentioned, I'll include a screen capture of the Roland Piano app so that you can get an idea of how that works. So all piano sounds are really personal. One person is bound to like Roland sounds better than Yamaha's or Casio's better than Roland's, etc. There really is no denying the fact that the sounds on the FP-30X, especially the concert piano, really are pretty amazing. Okay, effects. For effects, the Roland FP-30X has 10 levels of ambience, which is just reverb, and for brilliance, which is chorus, you can adjust that up one level from 0 to brighten a tone, or down one from 0 to unbrighten a tone. Now note that you can also go way deeper into customizing your piano sounds because the FP-30X is compatible with Roland's Piano Designer app, which works on a lot of their higher end pianos. This app allows you to really dig into tweaking your piano sounds by adjusting all sorts of resonances, custom tunings, all sorts of stuff. Now, I'm not going to be going over any of that in this video, but one important thing to note, though, is that you cannot make any of those changes on the piano itself. You can only do that on the Piano Designer app. Okay, connectivity. For connectivity, Roland made some really good improvements in almost every area over the FP30, so I'm pretty impressed here. First, I'll mention the connectivity items that didn't see an upgrade. As with the FP30, the FP30X has 2 headphone ports on the front of the piano, and a nice touch here from Roland is that you have a 1/8 inch and a 1/4 inch port, so regardless of your headphone type, you're not going to need an adapter. Also the same as with the FP30, there is a generic 1/4 inch sustain pedal port. There is an included cheap plastic brick switch style sustain pedal, and there's also a port for Roland's optional triple pedal unit. I would highly recommend upgrading to either the triple pedal unit or at least Roland's DP10 sustain pedal, which does support half pedaling. Okay, so now for all the cool new connectivity stuff. Roland added 1/4 inch left and right line outs. This is for connecting to external audio equipment like amps, PA systems, mixers, or audio interfaces. These are new on the FP30X. With the FP30, you had to use the headphone port, which is not only a lower quality signal, but also mutes the speakers. So this is a big addition. Anybody hoping to gig with this piano is going to be very pleased to see those. Bluetooth. The FP30 only had Bluetooth MIDI, and to be honest, in my opinion, Bluetooth MIDI is usually too laggy to be of much use. But on the FP30X, Roland not only still has the Bluetooth MIDI if you do want to use it, but the FP30X now has Bluetooth audio in. This is awesome because now you can use this to stream audio from a device into the piano, so you can play along with backing tracks, YouTube, etc. And something to note here is that Roland has supposedly upgraded their Bluetooth technology. The Bluetooth connection on my FP30 was pretty slow and it was pretty flaky. It would disconnect quite often. In my time testing the FP30X, the Bluetooth audio seemed really stable, but kind of like with the FP30, my Bluetooth connection to the app, which is MIDI, would magically disconnect me on a reasonably regular basis. This is why I always use a cable for MIDI with any piano. Now, this also could potentially be an issue with my iPad, in all fairness, but just thought I would mention that. USB flash drive. You can play back WAV or MP3 files from a flash drive. The FP30 did have this, but it was WAV files only. I also remember testing this on my FP30 and having issues getting to work. It actually works great on the FP30X. Okay, the USB to host port. This is a big one. On the FP30X, the USB to host port transmits both MIDI and audio. The FP30 was MIDI only. This is a massive addition, and this adds some very valuable functionality. You can stream audio into the piano from a device just using a USB cable. This is an alternative to using the Bluetooth audio in. This allows you to play along with YouTube or backing tracks on a device, but it also allows you to hear MIDI sounds from a sound library on your device through your piano speakers. Something to note here though, if you are going to use a USB cable as an audio in source, be very careful with your volume. I have no idea why Roland did this, but when I connect my iPad to the FP-30X using the USB cable, I lose the ability to change the volume on my iPad. I have never seen any other keyboard do this. And this actually kind of caught me off guard and almost hurt my ears because I connected the iPad, I started to play a backing track, and it was insanely loud, so I quickly tried to adjust the volume on my iPad, but it doesn't work. So I quickly took off my headphones, and then I figured out that when you are connected with the USB cable, you adjust the incoming audio volume with, you guessed it, function key combinations. The only reason I figured this out is the keys that do this happen to be labeled down at the bottom of the keyboard. In contrast, when I use Bluetooth audio in to stream audio into the device, I do still get the ability to adjust volume on my iPad, and I can also edit the volume even further with those function keys. Once again, I have no idea why Roland did this. Now, the other huge benefit of a built-in audio interface is that you can stream audio out of your piano direct to a device to use in audio recording software like a DAW on a device like GarageBand on an iPad, or to easily create high-quality performance videos with direct audio with just a USB cable in your smartphone. That's actually exactly how I recorded the earlier voice demo. The piano plugged straight into my iPhone with a USB cable and a lightning adapter, and that's it. Without this feature, like on the FP30, to create a performance video, you would also need some audio cables and an external audio interface like a Focusrite Scarlett. Okay, speakers. So just like the FP30, the speakers on the FP30X are two 12cm 11-watt downward-facing speakers. One notable addition to the FP30X, though, is the addition of 3 speaker options. You can turn them off all the time. You can turn it to stand, which is for when the keyboard is on a stand. When the downward-facing speakers are exposed, that would have been what was available on the FP30. And a new desk option. This is meant to optimize the sound. I'm thinking it's just EQing it differently while on a desk to minimize any muffling issues. So I've got the piano on a stand now where the speakers are exposed, so I'm going to do a quick demo of the speakers just as picked up by my iPhone's built-in mic, and I will include both the stand and desk versions just to see if there's any difference. A better test for the desk version would be to do it on a desk or a table, but I don't actually have one handy that's big enough for the piano, so this is going to have to do. I have to admit, while I would prefer upward-facing speakers, these speakers do sound really good. If Roland was to add a couple of upward-facing tweeters or something, or even find a way to have some upward-facing ports or something like that, it might even be better. You could definitely hear a lot more high-end with the desk setting, but the low-end might suffer a bit. To be honest, I'm not sure if I would use that or not, or if I owned an FP-30X, but it is a great option to have. Registrations. Technically, no. Just like the FP30, the FP30X does not give you the ability to save your custom setups as a registration. Given that the user interface is so minimal, this is really a shame. Now, there is the ability to save some settings as default so that they're set up when you turn the piano on. While this isn't a registration, it is a nice thing to have. These are the settings that get saved, and you do it by holding down Function and then pressing the record button. When the play and record buttons start to blink, then you press the record button again. Not terribly intuitive, but once you've set these, you'll probably just leave them the way they are and won't have to set them again. Okay, recording. There is a simple onboard MIDI recorder. You just hit the record button and record your playing and play it back and play along with it, etc. This is handy and useful for quickly capturing an idea, but for actual use in music production, it's not terribly useful. To do that properly, you're going to want to connect your piano to a device running DAW software like GarageBand on an iPad. There is a bit more MIDI recording functionality available within the Roland Piano app, which I will be going over in the next part of the review. Also note that there is no way to record audio on the FP-30X, only MIDI. Once again, though, given that the FP-30X has been upgraded with a built-in audio interface, you can easily record high-quality audio by, once again, just connecting your piano to a device using a USB cable. No external audio interface is required. Apps. Okay, so I already mentioned the Piano Designer app for deep diving into customizing your piano sounds, and I've been including screen captures of the Roland Piano app as I've been using it during this review, just to give you a sense of what it looks like. So you've already seen the area for selecting voices, layering, and adjusting relative volumes, etc. I'll just quickly show you a couple more sections of the app so that you can get a general idea of what kind of additional functionality it adds to your experience with the FP-30X. Okay, so from the dashboard, I'm not sure why they have this menu in the top right. It just basically turns the screen orange, and you've got the exact same choices that you have within this menu. So I'm not sure what that's all about. But if we go through this dashboard here, the connection area, this is where you set up your connection. So it's where you establish your MIDI connection, so either Bluetooth and pair it with the piano, or just plug in a USB cable if you're going that way. I'm already connected. I'm connected right now with Bluetooth MIDI. Then if I go to piano settings, this is where you'll spend most of your time when you're practicing and playing and stuff. If I click on tones, this is the area that you've already seen from the voice demo where I was choosing voices, setting up splits and layers, all of that type of thing. So I'm not going to go over that again. But if I go back to settings here, I can choose the volume with quite a bit more accuracy than I could, because you can see they've got 100 levels of volume as opposed to the 5 levels of volume that you get with the piano if you're just using the onboard kind of goofy buttons. Then I can also set my touch sensitivity, so you can see I've got it set to light. I could go back to the default of medium, whatever I like. Master tuning. This is basically so I could tune the piano to an acoustic instrument. If I was playing along and somebody's guitar was a little bit flat compared to my piano, then I could tune to match them. Personally, I'd ask them to retune their guitar to match me, but then brilliance is going to be to turn chorus, like leave it at 0, which is off, or turn it up a level, or down a level if you want to brighten or unbrighten a tone. So by default, it sounds like this. And if I move that up, you get a bit more brightness. Or if I move it down, a little bit less brightness. I'm not sure I hear too much of a difference, but it is subtle. Then you can also adjust the ambience depth, which is the reverb. So by default, and if I crank that, you can hear tons of reverb. So I'll just move that back down again. Then you can also transpose the keyboard. So if I want to go up a step, this is actually one of the areas where the key combinations actually work reasonably well. They are labeled on the keyboard here, so I can, easier almost than using the app, hold down Function and then go up or down to whatever key signature that I want to transpose to. So if I go back out to the main dashboard again, then I can go into metronome, where I can set the metronome speed. I can set the volume, and I can also go into set different options for the kind of beat that I want, all the standard usual metronome stuff. I never use a metronome anyway. I always use rhythms to practice with myself. And then back out at the dashboard again, if I go into library, this option gives you access to some free sheet music with an interface to play along. And there's also appears to be some kind of Roland Cloud membership you can buy to access additional sheet music. This isn't something I would ever use, so to be honest, I didn't really look into it at all, but feel free to go check that out. So if I choose some of the free included songs, you'll get the sheet music. You can click play. You can play along. You can mute left and right hand parts, all of that kind of thing. Not something I would use, but it is there if you're interested. Then back out at the dashboard. If I go to the recorder, note that when you're using the app or when you're using just the record button on the piano itself, that you're always going to be getting a MIDI recording. You can't record audio on the FP-30X. So if I go in here and start recording something, you get that kind of goofy synthesia style rising note thing. So if I save it, I can give it a name if I want to. I just won't bother. I can go back in, and now if I click play, I'll get the keyboard indication, and again, the synthesia falling note thing. Well, I guess it's nice to have. It doesn't seem super useful to me. Like I said earlier, if I actually wanted to record MIDI, I would use a USB cable instead to connect a device with a DAW running and record MIDI that way. But this is there if you want to use it, and you can record as many songs as your device is going to hold. So if I go back out to the dashboard here, now the accompaniment section. So the FP-30 actually had a handful of onboard rhythms with no accompaniment that you could play along with. They were okay, but to be honest, the selection was a bit lacking. Those have been removed from the FP-30X. It no longer has onboard rhythms. So it is cool that there is at least a rhythm section included within the app that can be useful to practice with. This isn't really a viable option for performing, though. There's the usual arranger keyboard options available. You can choose between different styles. You can adjust the tempo. You can say that you want an intro or an ending. There's 2 different variations. And there's some other options like autofill, that type of thing. So if I start this up, it tells you the key, or the chord that it's currently on. It starts at C by default. One thing to note, if you're using this with a Bluetooth connection instead of a cable connection, don't bother using the accompaniment. Just use the drums. There's too much lag, at least with my iPad, for the app to keep up with your chord changes. If I start playing here, and I'm connected with Bluetooth right now, listen for whether or not the accompaniment can pick up my chord changes in time. So you can see it's kind of a little bit behind me. Just going to hit stop here. So if I was just using this for practice, to be honest, I would turn, and I'm connected with Bluetooth, I would just turn on drums only, because then I can play along and I'm not going to have to worry about the accompaniment sounding weird because it's behind me. Do note, I'm not going to bother demoing it, but do note that if I connect with a cable instead of using Bluetooth MIDI, that the accompaniment works perfectly fine and keeps up with me. Okay, back out at the settings menu. If I go to the learning section, this is just basically a couple of games. This was on Piano Partner 2 as well. You can listen to sounds and then try and guess what the correct note was, or you can see notation shown to you, and then you have to play the correct note to match it, and you can keep score and all of that kind of stuff. Not something I would ever bother with, but it is there if you want to try it out. And then the settings option is just basically information about the app. Couple more things to mention about the app. There are no registrations built in, which is a letdown given that there's no onboard registrations with the FP-30X. Yamaha's Smart Pianist app has unlimited registrations, and even Casio's Music Space lets you save a handful of registrations. But a major issue to mention with this app, and it is a huge issue in my opinion, the app does not work if you are not connected to the internet. I have no idea why Roland did this, but given that the onboard user interface is pretty barren, in my opinion, you really need the app to be functional, especially if you are intending to use the FP-30X to busk or gig with so that you can choose voices and settings easily. Given that you need an internet connection to even open the app, that means if you're performing in a location where there is no internet, like let's say you're busking in a park or something, you're going to have to use data just to control your piano. I can understand why some functionality of the app might need an internet connection, but for controlling your piano and selecting sounds, I've got to say I'm not too impressed with that. I really hope Roland deals with that issue. Okay, so summary and other choices. As you can probably tell from my review, I have kind of a love-hate opinion of the FP-30X. Here are my pros and cons. Pros: the piano sounds are nothing short of spectacular. The action: if you want a heavier, more acoustic piano-like feel, not everybody does, but if you do, the action is fantastic. Connectivity: the addition of left and right line outs, a built-in audio interface, and Bluetooth audio in are awesome additions. Okay, the cons. Well, a huge one, the user interface. Having to use function key combinations for pretty much everything, even choosing sounds. I find that pretty frustrating, but maybe you won't. Second negative I have is actually related to the first, and that's the Roland Piano app. I knew before renting the FP-30X that the user interface hadn't changed much, or if at all, from the FP-30, but I had high hopes that this new app would alleviate my frustration with the user interface. To be honest, I would actually prefer the original Piano Partner 2 app over the new one. The navigation and menus were far more intuitive and easier to use. This new app is slow to respond, and the navigation and menus could really use a facelift. But the big issue with this app is the fact that it requires an internet connection to work. Okay, so I'll quickly compare the FP-30X to some other choices, but I do need to mention a strange pricing issue between the USA and Canada first. Every piano that I'm about to mention below, including other Roland pianos, sell for about the same in the USA and Canada when you take current exchange rates into account, except for the Roland FP-30X. I have no idea why this is the case, but even after taking exchange into account, the FP-30X sells for about 20% higher in Canada than it does in the USA. The current price in the US is about $800 at the time of this review, so at current exchange rates, that should be about $1,050 Canadian. But the FP-30X sells for $1,260 in Canada, which is more expensive than my Yamaha DGX 670, which is just crazy. So I will be quoting prices here, assuming that you're in the United States, so please keep that in mind. Okay, the FP-30X at around $800 US versus Roland's FP-10 at around $600 US. The FP-30X has more sounds and a higher-end processor, so the sounds are improved. It has left and right line outs and a built-in audio interface. That's a lot of extra features for only a couple $100 US. But if all you want to do is just sit down and play piano, the FP-10 does have the same action, so that might be enough for you and you can save some money. Okay, the FP-30X at $800 US versus the Casio PXS 1100 at $700 US. The PXS 1100 has fewer sounds, and the Roland piano sounds are probably a bit better quality. The big difference here is going to be the action. The Casio action is very light in comparison to the Roland, so the Roland action is much more acoustic piano-like, which, again, you may or may not prefer. And the Roland has the built-in audio interface, which is also a huge feature. They both have not very good user interfaces that rely heavily on function key combinations, and the apps for both pianos really aren't the greatest, but the Casio does have a couple of things in its favor. Super light at around 25 pounds, and it can run on batteries. Okay, the Roland FP-30X at $800 US versus the Yamaha P125 at around $700 US, or the newer P125A, also at around $700 US. As with the Casio, the Roland has more sounds, and the piano sounds are going to be more advanced than the P125 or P125A. And once again, the action on the Roland is a bit heavier and more acoustic piano-like, which, once again, you may or may not prefer. But the huge difference here for me is the user interface. The P125 and 125A's simple and intuitive button-driven user interface is fantastic. As I mentioned before, it is super easy to select voices, layers, and splits, and you can just glance at the panel to instantly know what your current choices are. And the P125 and P125A also have rhythms you can practice with on the piano itself instead of within an app. And for more complex settings and changes and setups, Yamaha's Smart Pianist app is light years better than the Roland Piano app. Now, do note that the P125 has been discontinued and hopefully just temporarily replaced with the P125A. This is exactly the same piano, except the audio interface has been removed from the P125A, so that means you can no longer stream audio in or out of the piano on the USB port, and that's a huge loss on the 125A. So even if I totally ignore price differences, how would I rank these four pianos as far as meeting my needs, which I totally realize are not necessarily your needs? Number 1, the Yamaha P125. Number 2, the Yamaha P125A. Yes, even without the audio interface, I would rather have that piano than the next two that I'm going to mention. It still has the awesome user interface, rhythms, and most of the functionality of Smart Pianist. I would just need to get an external audio interface and a mixer to regain the lost functionality from the P125. Number 3 for me would be the Casio PXS 1100. I'm ranking this above the FP-30X because while it also has a poor user interface, the action is lighter and that's more to my liking. To me, that's more important than a slightly higher quality sound engine, and you also have the added benefit of being able to run on batteries. So number 4 for me is last place is the FP-30X. But what if your needs are not the same as mine and you actually do want Roland's heavier, more realistic piano action and their supernatural sound engine? Then if you're okay with the user interface issues, your list should have the FP-30X at the top. But what if you would also really like to have a better user interface experience? Well, the next piano in Roland's FP line is the FP-60X. That piano actually has a fantastic user interface with lots of quick access buttons, an LCD screen, and it even has a mic in port. But it is quite a bit more money at around $1,250 US. Well, enter the brand new Roland FP-E50 Digital Piano Arranger. This piano looks to be selling for around $1,000 US, so it's cheaper than the FP-60X and $200 US more than the FP-30X. But the feature set announced so far looks to be off the charts. I will probably try and do a preliminary review on just the specs pretty soon, but this piano offers the same PHA-4 fully weighted action as the FP-30X has. It's got over 1,000 sounds, and it actually uses 2 sound engines. It's got the Supernatural sound engine, as well as Roland's expandable Zencore sound engine, which I believe is used on their Phantom synthesizers. It also has probably one of the best and most unique user interfaces I've ever seen. There are tons of quick access buttons and a screen. There's even slider controls to easily adjust relative layer volumes. There's a built-in mic input that not only has effects, but vocal harmonies and I believe a vocoder. It also has a full-featured arranger keyboard functionality with the usual arranger features, but you can also pre-program chord progressions and get the accompaniment to play them for you, which frees up both of your hands to just play along. And it also has left and right line outs and a built-in audio interface. All of that for only $200 US more than the FP-30X and $250 less than the FP-60X. I know I haven't actually seen one of these yet, but I have a feeling that this FP-E50 just might do extremely well. I guess we'll have to wait and see. So anyways, that pretty much rounds out my review on the Roland FP-30X. I hope you found this review to be helpful. The FP-30X has absolutely spectacular piano sounds, a heavier acoustic piano-like action, and awesome connectivity. But the user interface isn't the greatest. So depending on what you're looking for, it may be the perfect piano for you, or maybe not. So I've left links in the description if you want to check out current prices from Amazon in your area on the FP-30X or any of the other pianos I mentioned in this review. And I've also left some links to some online piano training that I recommend. So if you like the review, please feel free to smash the like button and subscribe to my channel. That does really help me out. Thanks again for stopping by. Happy piano playing and happy piano shopping, and have an awesome day.